Jamal checked his watch. 11:47 p.m. The polished marble floors of the 50th floor lobby gleamed under the recessed lighting, reflecting a distorted, elongated version of himself. A ghost in a grey jumpsuit. For the last 6 years, this had been his world after dark. A silent kingdom of glass and steel where he was the invisible caretaker. He moved through the empty halls and vacant offices with a practiced quiet, his presence marked only by the clean scent of polish and the subtle hum of his floor buffer. Invisibility was a kind of armor. It was safety. He'd learned that long before he ever started this job, long before he'd lost Jasmine, long before he became Maya's whole world. It was a lesson etched into the marrow of his bones, a quiet, constant hum beneath the surface of his thoughts. Don't be noticed, don't make trouble. Don't give anyone a reason to look twice. He finished the final sweep, the buffer powering down with a gentle sigh. The silence that followed was immense, broken only by the faint whisper of the building's ventilation system. It was time to go home. Maya would be asleep, her small body curled under the unicorn comforter Jasmine had bought her just before she got sick. Mrs. Patterson would be in the recliner, knitting or dozing, the television murmuring on a low volume. The thought of his daughter, of the warmth of their small apartment, was a gravitational pull. It was the anchor that kept him steady in this vast, empty ocean of corporate wealth. He had one more thing to do, a final check of the executive parking garage. A formality, usually. A quick walkthrough to ensure no lights were left on, no security doors ajar. He took the service elevator down to P1, the air growing cool and still. The garage was a concrete cavern filled with sleeping metal beasts. Teslas, Porsches, a gleaming black Bentley that belonged to the CEO, Serena Caldwell. He'd seen her only a handful of times, a blur of expensive fabrics and clipped, authoritative tones, sweeping through the lobby surrounded by a phalanx of suits. She was a legend in the building, the subject of hushed gossip among the day staff. A titan of industry, cold, brilliant, untouchable. Her car was still there, parked in its designated spot, right by the private elevator. That was odd. She never stayed this late. As he drew closer, he saw why. The driver's side door was ajar. A leg, clad in a ridiculously thin, high-heeled shoe, was sticking out at an awkward angle. Jamal's heart gave a hard, sudden thump against his ribs. His first instinct was pure, unadulterated caution. Walk away. This is not your business. Call security from the lobby. Do not get involved. He could already feel the familiar script playing out in his head, the one he'd been taught since he was a boy. A black man, a woman in distress, the middle of the night. It was a cocktail for disaster, a story that rarely ended well for the man who looked like him. He took a half step back, his hand already reaching for the radio on his belt. But then he heard it. A sound so small it was almost lost in the cavernous space. A choked, painful sob. It wasn't the sound of a titan. It was the sound of someone utterly broken. He hesitated, his thumb hovering over the call button. Jasmine's voice echoed in his memory, a warm and gentle chiding from a life that felt a million miles away. You can't just walk by when someone is hurting, Jamal. Your heart is too good for that. His heart, he thought grimly, was a liability. He took a cautious step forward. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice careful, deliberately non-threatening. "Miss Caldwell, are you all right?" There was no response, just another ragged breath. He moved closer, keeping a respectful distance. He could see her now, slumped in the driver's seat. Her usually immaculate blonde hair was a mess. Her face tear-streaked and pale in the dim garage light. An empty bottle of something expensive lay on the passenger seat. The sharp, cloying smell of alcohol hung heavy in the air. She was intoxicated, dangerously so. "Ms. Caldwell," he said again, a little louder this time. She stirred, lifting her head slowly. Her eyes, when they finally focused on him, were glassy and unfocused. "Go away," she slurred, her voice thick. "Leave me alone." He saw the tremor in her hands, the way she swayed even while sitting down. She was in no condition to be alone, let alone drive. He thought of Maya. He thought of what could happen if this woman tried to put a key in that ignition. He thought of the family that would get a knock on the door. His gut clenched. Jasmine was right. He couldn't walk away. "Mom, you can't stay here," he said gently. "It's not safe. Can I call someone for you? A family member? A friend?" She shook her head, a fresh wave of tears spilling down her cheeks. "No one," she whispered, the word cracking with a raw, desolate pain that stunned him. "There's no one." For a single, terrifying moment, the polished CEO vanished, and all he saw was a woman consumed by a loneliness so profound it felt like a physical presence in the cold air. It was a loneliness he recognized. It was a loneliness he lived with every single day. He had a choice. He could call building security. They would handle it. They would call the police or an ambulance. It would become an incident report, a corporate scandal, a piece of gossip for the morning crew. Her reputation, her career, could be shattered. Or he could handle it himself. He could help this broken person in front of him, quietly, without an audience. But that path was a minefield. Taking her home? Impossible. Getting her an Uber? She could barely speak her own name, let alone an address. He felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. One wrong move, one misunderstanding, and his own carefully constructed, invisible life could be destroyed. He had a daughter to think about, a daughter whose entire world rested on his shoulders. He looked at Serena Caldwell, the powerful woman who held the fate of thousands of employees in her hands, now unable to even sit up straight. He made a decision. It was a foolish decision, a dangerous decision, a decision that went against every instinct for self-preservation he had. He was going to help her. He had to. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his own phone. He had one phone call he could make, one person he could trust. "Mrs. Patterson," he said when she answered, her voice warm and sleepy. "It's Jamal. I'm sorry to call so late, but I've got an emergency at work. I'm going to be a while. Is there any way Maya can stay with you tonight?" He hated lying to her, even a little. But how could he explain this? "I found my billionaire CEO drunk in the garage, and I'm bringing her home." The world wasn't built for that kind of truth. Getting Serena out of the car and into his own beat-up sedan was an ordeal. She was a dead weight, mumbling incoherently about stock prices and betrayal. He was careful, professional, his hands only touching her arm for support, his voice a low, steady murmur of reassurance. The 10-minute drive to his apartment building felt like an eternity. With every red light, he imagined a police car pulling up behind him, the flashing lights, the questions he couldn't possibly answer in a way that would make sense. "Yes, officer, this is Serena Caldwell. No, I haven't kidnapped her. I'm the janitor. I'm just trying to help." The words sounded absurd even in his own head. He managed to get her inside and up the 2 flights of stairs to his apartment. The place was small but immaculate. Maya's artwork was taped to the refrigerator, a vibrant explosion of color in their quiet life. A picture of him, Maya, and Jasmine sat on the small end table by the couch, the 3 of them smiling on a sunny day at Coney Island, a lifetime ago. He guided Serena past it, a pang of something, guilt, betrayal, shooting through him. He was bringing this chaos, this stranger, into the sanctuary he had built for his daughter, the home he had shared with his wife. He led her to Maya's room. The unicorn comforter seemed to glow in the soft light from the hallway. He couldn't put her on the couch. It was too public, too open. Maya's room felt safer, more contained. Her expensive silk dress was stained and damp. He couldn't let her sleep like that. He opened Maya's dresser drawer and pulled out one of her larger t-shirts, one with a cartoon cat and the words, "Positive Vibes" on it. It would be ridiculously small on Serena, but it was clean and dry. He laid it on the bed, along with a glass of water and 2 aspirin on the nightstand. He averted his eyes, standing in the doorway. "Ms. Caldwell," he said softly, "I'm going to leave you here to rest. There's a clean shirt on the bed if you want to change. The bathroom is just across the hall. I'll be right outside the door if you need anything." He didn't wait for a response. He pulled the door almost closed, leaving it cracked just enough to hear if she got sick or fell. Then he grabbed the spare blanket from the hall closet, laid it on the floor, and positioned himself against the wall, his body a silent, respectful barrier between her and the rest of the world. As he lay there in the dark, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a cold, heavy dread. He thought of the next morning. He thought of Maya's school play. It was at 10 a.m. He was supposed to be there front row center. He had promised her. He always kept his promises. He closed his eyes, praying he hadn't just made a mistake that would cost him everything. The first light of morning was a pale, grey smear against the window when Jamal's eyes snapped open. A sense of panic, cold and immediate, seized him. He'd fallen asleep. He sat up, his back aching from the hard floor, and looked at his phone. 9:15 a.m. A string of missed calls from Mrs. Patterson. A text message. "Maya is so excited. We're leaving for the school now. See you there." A wave of nausea rolled over him. The play started in 45 minutes. The school was a 20-minute drive away, without traffic. He was going to be late. He might even miss it entirely. He scrambled to his feet, his heart hammering against his ribs. Failure. The word echoed in the silent apartment. He had failed Maya. For what? For a stranger, for a woman who wouldn't even remember his name. He ran a hand over his face, the stubble scratching his palm. He had to get there. He just had to. He pushed open Maya's bedroom door. Serena was still asleep, curled on her side, looking small and fragile in his daughter's cartoon t-shirt. For a moment, the sight of her filled him with a bitter resentment. He had sacrificed his promise to his daughter for her. He scribbled a quick note on a piece of paper from the notepad by the phone. "You are unwell. I brought you here to be safe. My name is Jamal. I work at your company. Your car is safe. I will take you to it when you are ready. There is water here for you." He left it on the kitchen counter where she would see it. He had to go. He could deal with the consequences later. He was halfway to the door when he heard a noise from the bedroom, a soft groan. He froze, his hand on the doorknob. He couldn't just leave her here, confused and alone. His conscience, that stubborn, jasmine-infused conscience, wouldn't let him. He walked back to the doorway of Maya's room. "Ms. Caldwell?" he said softly. Her eyes fluttered open. They were clearer now, but filled with a dawning, horrified confusion. She sat up, clutching the unicorn comforter to her chest. She looked at the room, at the childish drawings on the wall, at the Positive Vibes t-shirt she was wearing, and then at him, standing in the doorway. He saw the flicker of recognition, followed immediately by a wave of pure, undiluted panic. Her face went pale. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Where am I? What happened?" He saw her eyes dart around the room, cataloguing every detail, her sharp mind piecing together a narrative. A strange room. A man she vaguely recognized as the night janitor, waking up in clothes that weren't hers. No memory of the night before. He saw the exact moment the confusion hardened into fear, and the fear curdled into suspicion. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, how this looked. He knew what she was thinking, and he knew that in this situation, his truth didn't stand a chance against her fear. "My name is Jamal," he said, keeping his voice as calm and steady as he could, holding his hands up slightly, a gesture of peace. "You were in your car last night in the garage. You weren't well. I brought you here to make sure you were safe." Her eyes narrowed. She didn't believe him. Of course she didn't. Why would she? She reached for her purse, her movements frantic, and pulled out her phone. Her hands were shaking as she plugged it into the charger he had left on the nightstand. While she waited for it to power on, a heavy, suffocating silence filled the small apartment. Jamal stood perfectly still, his back against the wall, a prisoner in his own home. He checked his watch again, 9:45 a.m. Maya would be getting ready to go on stage. She would be scanning the audience, her big brown eyes searching for his face, and he wouldn't be there. A knot of grief and self-loathing tightened in his chest. The phone chimed to life. Serena's fingers flew across the screen. He could hear a voice on the other end, sharp and professional. "Rachel?" "It's me," Serena said, her voice a raw, terrified whisper. "I need you. I woke up in someone's house. A man's house." Jamal closed his eyes. It was happening. The nightmare he had spent his entire life trying to avoid was unfolding right here, in the hallway outside his daughter's bedroom. "I'm wearing clothes that aren't mine," Serena continued, her voice breaking. "I don't remember anything after the board meeting. Oh God, Rachel, I don't remember anything." He could hear the tinny, urgent squawking of the woman on the other end of the phone. He didn't need to hear the words. He knew what she was saying. "Don't talk to him. Lock yourself in a room. Call 911. Tell me the address." It was the standard, sensible advice. It was the advice that would ruin his life. He braced himself for the sirens, for the knock on the door, for the humiliation and the accusations. He thought about Maya having to see him in handcuffs. He thought about his job, his reputation, the quiet, careful life he had built. All of it turning to ash because he had tried to do the right thing. Serena was listening to her friend, her knuckles white as she gripped the phone. "He's here now," she whispered into the receiver. "He's just standing in the hall." She looked at him then, her gaze a mixture of terror and something else he couldn't quite read. It wasn't pure accusation. It was confusion, doubt. Her brilliant, analytical mind was at war with her primal fear. The man standing in her hallway didn't look like a monster. He looked tired and sad. He wasn't yelling or making excuses. He was just waiting, as if he'd been expecting this all along. "What does he want?" she asked, her question directed as much to him as to her friend. Jamal finally spoke, his voice quiet but clear, cutting through the tension in the room. "I don't want anything," he said. "I just wanted to make sure you were safe." He looked at the clock on the wall, 10:05 a.m. The play had started. He had missed it. The finality of that realization hit him like a physical blow. The fight went out of him, replaced by a profound, weary sadness. "I have to go," he said, his voice flat. "My daughter, she had a school play this morning." The words hung in the air between them. My daughter. He saw something shift in Serena's expression. Her eyes flickered from his face to the unicorn comforter, to the small, sparkly sneakers tucked neatly by the closet door. She was in a child's room. This man had a child, a daughter who had a school play this morning, a play he was missing because of her. The pieces began to click into place, forming a different picture, a different story from the one her fear and her friend were telling her. "Rachel, hang on," she said into the phone, her voice less panicked now, more controlled. She got out of the bed and walked slowly out of the bedroom, pulling the comforter around her like a shield. She saw the note on the kitchen counter and picked it up, her eyes scanning his neat, careful handwriting. She walked over to the refrigerator and looked at the drawings. A smiling sun, a lopsided house with 3 stick figures standing in front of it, a man, a little girl, and a woman with angel wings. Underneath, in a child's scrawl, it said, "My family." She turned back to Jamal. The fear in her eyes was slowly being replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding. She saw the indentation on the cheap rug in the hallway, right outside the bedroom door where she had slept. She remembered him saying, "I'll be right outside the door." He hadn't slept in a bed. He had slept on the floor, like a guard, like a protector, not a predator. At that moment the front door opened, and Maya bounced in, her face alight with post-performance excitement, followed by Mrs. Patterson. "Daddy!" Maya yelled, running toward him. She stopped short when she saw Serena standing in the middle of their living room, wrapped in her unicorn comforter. Maya wasn't scared. She just tilted her head, her expression one of pure, unfiltered curiosity. She looked from Serena's sad eyes to her father's exhausted face. Maya looked up at Serena with those big brown eyes, the same eyes as her mother. "That lady looks sad," she said to her father, her voice carrying in the quiet room. "Like the kind where you smile, but your eyes don't." Then she walked right up to Serena, who flinched almost imperceptibly. Maya held out a crumpled piece of paper. It was the program from her play. On the back, she had drawn a picture of a stick figure with a crown, singing on a stage. "I was the singing flower," she said proudly. "I sang for you, even though you weren't there, Daddy." Mrs. Patterson recorded it. Serena stared at the drawing, at this small, brave, forgiving child. She looked at Jamal, who was watching his daughter with an expression of such profound, aching love that it took her breath away. The whole story was there, in his eyes. The sacrifice, the fear, the unwavering love for his child. The integrity that had made him sleep on a floor to protect a stranger's dignity, even at the risk of his own life. The phone was still pressed to her ear, Rachel's frantic voice a distant, meaningless buzz. Serena lowered the phone. "Rachel, I need you to listen," she said, her voice different now, clearer, steadier. All the fear and confusion had been burned away, replaced by a shame so deep it felt like it was physically crushing her. "Nothing happened. He helped me when no one else would." She took a deep breath, the words coming out in a rush of cathartic truth. "He has a daughter. He missed her school performance because he was making sure I was safe." She looked at the rug in the hallway. He slept on the floor of her bedroom. A long pause. "No," she corrected herself, looking at Jamal, her eyes filled with a new, dawning respect. "He slept on the floor outside her bedroom. Call off whatever you were about to do. Just stop." She hung up the phone. The silence in the apartment was different now. It was no longer heavy with suspicion, but with the fragile, awkward weight of a truth that had almost been buried. Jamal felt the tension drain out of his shoulders, the coiled knot of fear in his gut loosening just slightly, just enough to breathe. He hadn't been arrested. He hadn't been accused. He had made it to the other side of the minefield, but the relief was mingled with the sharp, bitter taste of what he had lost. He had still missed the play. That was a fact that no one could change. Serena stood there, clutching the comforter, looking utterly lost. The powerful CEO was gone. In her place was a woman who had come face to face with her own vulnerability, and with the quiet, unshakable decency of a man she had been ready to destroy. I'm so sorry," she whispered, the words sounding inadequate, hollow. "I don't know what to say." She looked around the small, clean apartment, at the evidence of a life built on love and care, a life so different from her own world of transactions and boardrooms. Her eyes landed on the family photo by the couch. "Your wife?" she asked softly. Jamal nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "Jasmine," he said. "She passed away 3 years ago." The information settled between them, adding another layer of understanding, another layer of shame for Serena. He was a single father, a widower, and he had risked everything for her. Her mind, so used to solving problems, immediately went to the only tool she knew: money. Let me help you," she said, her voice gaining a bit of its old take-charge tone. "I want to compensate you for your trouble, for your time, for everything. I can write you a check, a large one. It's the least I can do." Jamal looked at her. He saw the genuine, desperate need in her eyes to make this right, to fix it, to put it back in a box and close the lid. But she was trying to fix it the wrong way. He thought of Jasmine again, of the lessons she had taught him about pride and dignity. He shook his head slowly but firmly. "No," he said, his voice quiet but unyielding. "Thank you, Ms. Caldwell, but no." Serena looked stunned. "Why not? I owe you. I put you in an impossible position. I almost—" She couldn't bring herself to say the words. "I almost ruined your life." "You don't owe me anything," Jamal said, and for the first time since she'd woken up, he met her gaze directly. There was no anger in his eyes, only a deep, profound weariness. "I did what I thought was right. My character isn't for sale. My integrity doesn't have a price tag." He gestured around the small apartment. "I don't have much. This apartment, my car, my job, they can take all of that. But my dignity, the respect of my daughter, that's mine. That's all I have. And it's not something you can buy." His words landed with the force of a physical blow. Serena felt her cheeks flush with a fresh wave of shame. He was right. She had tried to turn an act of profound human decency into a transaction. She had tried to pay him for his character. It was the most insulting thing she could have done. She saw the chasm between their worlds then, not as a matter of wealth, but of values. He lived in a world of principles. She lived in a world of price tags. "You're right," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. That was arrogant and thoughtless." She finally let the comforter drop, standing before him in the ridiculous t-shirt, stripped of her power, her wealth, her pride. Just a person who had been shown a kindness she didn't deserve and hadn't known how to receive. Just then, Mrs. Patterson, who had been quietly making tea in the kitchen, came back into the room. She handed a steaming mug to Jamal and then, without a word, offered one to Serena. She was a woman who had seen a lifetime of trouble and knew that sometimes the only thing to do was to offer a small, warm comfort. "I have the video of the play, Jamal," she said gently, patting his arm. "Maya was wonderful, a true star." She pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. And so they sat, the three of them, the janitor, the CEO, and the little girl, on the worn floral sofa in the small Brooklyn apartment. Mrs. Patterson hit play. The screen filled with the wobbly, handheld image of a school auditorium stage, decorated with brightly colored cardboard trees and flowers. Then, Maya walked to the center of the stage. She was dressed as a sunflower, a huge, yellow crepe paper halo around her face. She took a deep breath, and then she began to sing. Her voice, clear and sweet and perfectly on-key, filled the silent apartment. It was a simple song about sunshine and growing, but she sang it with a pure, heartfelt joy that was mesmerizing. She sang as if her heart was about to burst. As he watched, Jamal felt the last of his composure crumble. The stress of the last 12 hours, the fear, the anger, the crushing disappointment of missing this moment. It all came rushing to the surface. A tear slid down his cheek, then another. He didn't try to stop them. He just sat there, watching his beautiful, brilliant daughter on the tiny screen, and wept with a mixture of pride, relief, and grief. Maya, seeing his tears, crawled into his lap. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just wrapped her small arms around his neck and held him tight. "It's okay, Daddy," she whispered into his ear. "You're here now." Serena watched this exchange, a silent, humbled witness. She had spent her life surrounded by power, ambition, and wealth. She had negotiated billion-dollar deals and faced down hostile boards. but she had never seen anything as powerful as the quiet, unconditional love between this father and his daughter. She had never witnessed a strength as profound as Jamal's. He had faced down her fear, her suspicion, and her power with nothing but his own quiet integrity. And he had won, not by fighting, but by simply being a good man. In that moment, something inside Serena Caldwell shifted permanently. She finally understood. True wealth wasn't about the number in her bank account. It was about this. It was about presence. It was about showing up. It was about the things money could never, ever buy. She looked at the man crying silently on the couch, and for the first time she didn't see the janitor. She saw a hero, an everyday hero who had saved her in more ways than one. The days that followed were quiet. Serena arranged for a car to take her home, after borrowing a spare tracksuit from Mrs. Patterson. She and Jamal didn't exchange numbers or make plans to see each other again. An invisible line had been crossed. A strange and powerful intimacy forged in the crucible of that long night. But they both instinctively knew to retreat back to their own worlds. And yet, everything had changed. When Jamal returned to work on Monday night, he did so with a sense of trepidation. He expected a summons from HR, a quiet dismissal, a severance check. He expected the consequences he had been bracing for all along. But the call never came. The week passed in its usual silent rhythm. He polished the floors, emptied the trash, and kept to the shadows just as he always had. But he felt different. The armor of invisibility felt heavier now, more like a cage. He had been seen, truly seen, by one person in this building. And it had changed him. Then, on Friday, something unusual happened. As he was cleaning the executive suite, Serena Caldwell's office door opened. She was working late, a common occurrence, but she had never once acknowledged his presence before. Tonight, she stepped out into the hallway. "Jamal," she said. It was the first time she had used his name at work. The sound of it in the empty, opulent hallway was jarring. "Good evening, Miss Caldwell," he replied, his voice neutral, his hand still on the handle of his cleaning cart. "I wanted to thank you again," she said, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. "For what you did." "It was nothing," he said, the automatic, self-effacing response rising to his lips. "No," she said, cutting him off gently. "It was everything." She held out a small, beautifully wrapped box. "This is for Maya," she said. "I checked with her school. Her 10th birthday is next week. I hope she likes it." Jamal looked at the box, then back at Serena. His first instinct was to refuse, to reiterate that he didn't want or need her gifts. But he saw the look in her eyes. It wasn't charity. It wasn't an attempt to pay him off. It was a simple, human gesture of gratitude. It was an acknowledgement, an apology, a beginning. He took the box. "Thank you," he said. "I'll give it to her." He opened it later, at home. Inside was the most beautiful set of professional-grade colored pencils and sketch pads he had ever seen. It was a thoughtful gift, a gift that said, "I see your daughter. I know who she is." Tucked inside was a small, handwritten card. It didn't say much, just, "For the singing flower. Never stop sharing your light with the world. Serena." Maya was ecstatic. She spent the entire weekend drawing, filling the pages with vibrant, joyful worlds. A few weeks later, an email went out to all company employees from the CEO's office. It announced a new initiative, the Employee Spotlight Program. Once a month, a non-executive employee would be chosen to have lunch with the CEO, to share their story and their perspective on the company. It was a corporate-sounding program, but Jamal knew where it had come from. It was Serena's way of learning to see the people who were invisible to her. It was her way of building bridges across the chasm that had separated them. The biggest change, however, was smaller and more personal. The following month, Maya had her parent-teacher conference, scheduled for 4 p.m. on a Tuesday. In the past, Jamal would have had to use a precious vacation day or beg his supervisor, Mr. Henderson, to let him leave early, always feeling the man's grudging reluctance. It was a constant source of stress, juggling his rigid work schedule with the demands of single parenthood. But on the Monday before the conference, Jamal's supervisor approached him, a look of bewildered respect on his face. "Jamal," Henderson said, "I just got off the phone with Ms. Caldwell's office. She said you need to be out of here by 3 p.m. tomorrow for your daughter's school. She said to bill the hours to her personal account. She made it very clear that it wasn't a request." Jamal was stunned into silence. It was such a small thing, a minor adjustment in the grand scheme of things, but it was monumental. Serena hadn't thrown money at the problem. She had used her power to give him something far more valuable: time, presence, the ability to be the father he needed to be without penalty. She was learning. The next day, as he walked out of the towering glass building at 2:55 p.m., the afternoon sun warming his face, he felt a sense of freedom he hadn't realized he'd been missing. He walked to the subway, not as an invisible janitor, but as Jamal, a father, a man who had been tested and had not been broken. He arrived at Maya's school with time to spare, his heart light. He was there to hear Ms. Davis rave about his daughter's intelligence, her kindness, her artistic talent. He was present for all of it. That night, as he tucked Maya into bed, she looked up at him, her expression serious. "Daddy," she said, "do you think Mommy can see us?" Jamal's heart ached with a familiar, bittersweet pang. He smoothed the hair back from her forehead. "I know she can, sweetie," he said. "And I think," Maya continued, her voice soft, "that she would be happy you made a new friend, even if she was a sad lady at first." He smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. "Yeah," he said, "I think she would be too." For years, Jamal had lived his life trying to be invisible, trying to avoid mistakes, trying to never give anyone a reason to question his character. He believed that his survival, and Maya's, depended on his ability to move through the world without making a ripple. But that night in the parking garage, he had made a different choice, a dangerous choice. He had stepped out of the shadows and into someone else's storm, and somehow, against all odds, it had led him here, to a place of mutual respect, of quiet understanding, of being seen. Maybe the world wasn't fair. Maybe the odds were still stacked against him in 1,000 different ways. Maybe there would always be people who would see his skin color before they saw his character. But that night had taught him something important. It had taught him that there were also people like Serena, people who were willing to have their assumptions shattered, people who could learn to see with their hearts instead of their fears. And it had taught him that his own strength wasn't in his invisibility, but in his integrity, in his love for his daughter, in the simple, unwavering decency that his wife, Jasmine, had seen in him all along. He was no longer just a ghost in the machine. He was Jamal. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. From invisible to unforgettable, Jamal's story proves that doing the right thing matters, even when it costs you everything. If you believe in stories about everyday heroes, please like and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that integrity still matters. The dynamic at the company continued its slow, subtle evolution. Jamal never took the employee spotlight lunch. He felt it would be a betrayal of the quiet, unstated nature of their understanding. But he watched as others did. He saw the security guard from the front desk, a woman from the mailroom, a cook from the cafeteria, all emerge from their lunches with the CEO with a new sense of pride, a new spring in their step. They had been seen. Their stories had been heard. Serena was keeping her unspoken promise. She was dismantling the invisible walls in her own kingdom, one conversation at a time. Their interactions remained brief, professional, yet charged with a shared history. A nod in the hallway, a quiet, Good evening, Jamal. A brief, genuine smile that reached her eyes. He learned, through the building's ever-active grapevine, that she had finalized her divorce, that she had sold the massive estate in the suburbs and moved into a smaller apartment in the city, that she was spending more time volunteering at a youth arts foundation, the same one she had sent the gift certificate for in Maya's birthday card. She was recalibrating her life, searching for the kind of meaning that couldn't be found on a balance sheet. One evening, about 6 months after that fateful night, Jamal was waxing the floors near the bank of elevators when the doors opened. Serena stepped out, along with a sharply dressed woman he recognized from photos as her friend, the lawyer, Rachel. Rachel glanced at him, her eyes flicking over his grey jumpsuit with a dismissive, uninterested air, and then did a double-take. He saw the flicker of recognition, the dawning memory. Her cheeks colored slightly. Serena stopped. "Rachel, I don't believe you've been properly introduced," she said, her voice calm and firm, leaving no room for awkwardness. "This is Jamal. He's the man I told you about, the one who helped me." Rachel's professional composure cracked for a moment. She looked from Serena's steady gaze to Jamal's quiet dignity. She looked deeply uncomfortable, and for a moment, Jamal felt a flash of satisfaction. "It's a pleasure to meet you," Rachel stammered, extending a hand. Jamal wiped his own hand on his pants before shaking hers. His grip was firm. "Ma'am," he said, his voice even. He wasn't going to make it easy for her, but he wouldn't be rude. He was a professional. More than that, he was a man who knew his own worth, a lesson he was still learning to fully embrace. Serena watched the exchange, a small, knowing smile on her face. It was a closing of a circle, a quiet public correction of a private wrong. "Jamal," Serena said, turning her attention back to him. "Maya's school is having their annual art fair next month, aren't they? I saw a flyer at the community center." Jamal was surprised she knew. "Yes, Mom, she's been working on a piece for it for weeks." "I'd like to come," Serena said simply. "If that's all right with you and Maya, of course. I'm a patron of the school's art program now. I'd love to see her work." The invitation was more than just an invitation. It was a gesture of friendship. It was an entry into his world, offered on his terms. "She would like that very much, Ms. Caldwell," Jamal said, and for the first time in their acquaintance, he smiled at her, a real, warm smile. "Please," she said, her own smile breaking through, "call me Serena." The night of the art fair, the school gymnasium was buzzing with energy. Parents and children moved through the makeshift gallery, admiring paintings, sculptures, and drawings taped to the walls. Jamal stood with Maya in front of her display. She had created a large, intricate diorama of their apartment, every detail perfect, from the floral pattern on the sofa to the family picture on the end table. In the center of the scene were two figures, a tall man and a small girl, holding hands. He felt a presence beside him and turned to see Serena. She wasn't dressed in her usual power suit. She wore simple dark jeans, a soft cashmere sweater, and flat shoes. She looked relaxed, approachable. She looked happy. "It's incredible, Maya," Serena said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. "You have a real gift." Maya beamed, her pride shining from her face. "That's my daddy and me," she explained, pointing to the figures. "We're a team." "I can see that," Serena said softly, her eyes meeting Jamal's over Maya's head. In that moment, in the noisy, crowded gymnasium, they weren't the CEO and the janitor. They were just two people from different worlds who had found a common ground in a shared moment of crisis and a shared appreciation for a little girl's artistic heart. They were friends. Jamal's story reminds us that character isn't built in the spotlight. It's built in the small choices when no one is watching. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories about real people facing real challenges with grace. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Jamal's situation?